Welcome to Buckets. My name's Matt Moore, and I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, joined by professional bettor Raheem Palmer. Raheem, what's good?
Yo, life is good. I cannot complain. NBA is here. We're in mid-season form. I'm just excited. I'm sorry.
Raheem's doing well. Brandon Anderson, NBA futures analyst. How are you?
I'm doing well. We are getting ready to wrap up NFL. Big weekend ahead. Your Chiefs are playing. I am ready to wrap up NFL and get into more NBA. We are just past 41 games for some of these teams, the ones that played all of them. So we're at the midseason. This is the point where things really start to ramp up. So I'm excited for it.
I wish you guys had another pod between now and the AFC, not the AFC Championship game. It just feels like it, because I actually have a play I want to try and sell you on. I will hit you up in Slack with that. It's an alternate line both ways. Okay, so this is NBA, and we are going to talk today about power ratings. A reminder that all of our analysis, everything that you need to know to bet. If you want to track your bets, download the Action Network app. Well, if you haven't done so and you're just like, well, I like listen to the pod, but I don't know, like I can track my own stuff. You will find so many ways to get advantage. You'll be like, oh, there is a better line over here. Oh, wow, the money is coming in on this other team and the lines move the other direction from the public. Wow. Oh, Matt took the Celtics again. Oh no. All these things you'll be able to find and discuss and figure out. It helps you be a smarter, better. Download the Action Network app today. A reminder, give us a 5-star review on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'm giving away a copy of Chris Herring's new book, Blood in the Garden, to somebody. Leave your Twitter handle in there. Let me know that you left a 5-star podcast. Hit me up on Twitter at HB Basketball. Giving away a free copy to a random 5-star listener. Let's get it. That book is phenomenal, by the way. There's one where Riley had the forwards and centers line up on either side in 2 lines, and the guards had to dribble through them while getting hit. And one of them just like dribbled entirely around it. It was just like, nope. Absolutely incredible stories from that book. You're going to want it. Leave a 5-star review. Today, we're talking about power ratings. It's a mid-season. We're at the midway point of the season. And Brandon wanted to get a check-in on where, based off of our models, Raheem and I have our power ratings and talk about the differences between them. Brandon, take it away.
Yeah, so we're at the midseason. I know it feels like All-Star break is midseason, but that ends up more like 2/3 of the season. So we'll get a lot of midseason stuff coming here. We're trying on our Friday happy hour to rank things or draft things or put things in order. This is what I've done my entire life, put things in order. So just trying to give you something you can count on each week. So I figured a good place to start that is at the midseason. We're going to rank teams, but we're going to rate teams. So let's start with that. So Matt, you made the distinction between power rankings and power ratings. These today are our power ratings. Tell us what's the difference between those two.
So power ratings are typically used by both books and professional bettors to establish what the difference is between two teams for a line. It's built off of a model. Now, I've done power rankings before, done them lots, but that's just like, well, okay, sure. They're this record and they have this net differential, but I know that they're a better team. And so you put them higher and, oh, well, okay, sure. This team grades out well and they have a great point differential, but they're not going to win in the playoffs. So down they go. None of that. This is an objective measure. Now, in Raheem's case in particular, and correct me if I'm wrong, Raheem, manual adjustments and weights are made to correct for what the model spits out. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but I mean, for the sake of this, I didn't make any manual adjustments at all. I just left it straight raw.
Gotcha. So our model spits out a number, and we have 2 different models that like two. I actually have 3 because I use 2. And then I have said this on every Buckets podcast we've done. You need to trust Raheem's. Okay. I am test driving one. Now, I've been more successful this season than any other. This has helped me so much just because you have to have, in my opinion, to bet the NBA sides and totals nightly, you have to have a number to compare it against. You can't just be like, well, I think that they're 2 possessions better than this. That's tough, right? You can be right that the team was better, but still lose because the spread was just a little bit too sharp for you. It's one of the reasons why so many bettors feel that the NBA is too sharp. So I built 2 different models, and one of them is what I call my matchup model. And that determines like specifically how these 2 teams and how they play. My power ratings model is basically versus an average team. So based off of the league averages for how often teams play in transition and on half court and how they perform in those areas, how do those teams compare in both offense and defense in half court and transition? And it gives me a number. Mine's pretty simple. Raheem is a lot more complicated, I know.
Yeah. So
I think mine is actually simple. Like mine is pretty much, it takes into account net rating like really heavily. So when you look at a team like the Jazz, for instance, their net rating is pretty high. So even though they continue to lose these games as huge favorites, they've blown out enough teams to where that's why they're rated so highly.
Yeah, so I got both of the power ratings from you guys. You gave me the raw number power rating for each team, non-adjusted, like you said, and I made a composite. I just put Raheem's number, Matt's number, I averaged them together, and basically what we're looking at is something like a net rating, a plus number or a minus number to kind of represent the team. So what I want to do is just go through from 1 to 30. We're going to talk about every single team because we don't have time to do all of that. We've talked about some of these teams plenty anyways, but I try to kind of pinpoint, okay, where do the tiers drop off between these different ratings? About every plus 1.5 is another new tier. So we'll go tier by tier and just kind of talk about where do the ratings stand out, one different from each other between the two of your models, and what does that mean? And also just which teams kind of stood out as like, whoa, do we realize this team is that high or that low? So start at the top really quickly though. Suns, Warriors, Jazz are the top three in that order in our composite. So you both have different number ones. We've talked a lot about these teams. So just really quickly, from your power rating system, Matt, you've got the Phoenix Suns number one. Make the case for why they are number one in your system.
They're more consistent on both sides of the ball. So the big problem is that the Warriors offense is so pedestrian, especially as of late, that they've really fallen off and they've kind of tailed off. Now, they were number one in my model for a consistent long time, obviously, because they were just destroying teams. But as time has gone on, and Raheem's talked about this, about how their offense is a little bit solvable, they've really kind of dipped. I mean, if you look at it, Golden State offensively only has a 0.15 average advantage on in half court offense. As a comparison, the Brooklyn Nets are at 0.03. Like, that's a big differential. So what I'm basically telling you is Golden State per possession is not all that much better than the average half-court offense or the average half-court defense allows. Like, they're just not necessarily having a big advantage there. The Suns, on the other hand, have a slightly better average offensively. They're not destroying it. They're good. It's 0.03. But in particular, they're also great on the defensive end. In half court in particular, this is all half court for the Suns. They are 0.05 better in half court defense. That gives them a monumental edge in half court. One thing to note as we're kind of doing this, like one of the reasons I went with this approach, there's a number of reasons I went with the approach that I did, but one of the things I was trying to do, teams primarily play in the half court. And over the course of a season, it slows down. And in the playoffs in particular, it slows down even more. And for me, if you ask me, how do you tell if a team is good? It's, can you get stops in the half court? Can you get buckets in the half court? Because if a team gets back and plays good transition defense, that can really wear you out. We're going to talk about another team that's got the impact of. So for me, the Suns have been better offensively, and they are just killer defensively in the half court. And that gets them a massive edge. Golden State's close because of their transition stuff, but Golden State's half-court offense simply hasn't been good enough to get them number one.
Yeah, so Matt, you got them at plus 9.9 for Phoenix, well out ahead, really in their own tier or a couple tiers above. And you got the Warriors just behind the Jazz, actually at third. Noted Warriors hater, Raheem, has the Warriors at the top of his power ratings. So Raheem, why are they number one, and why don't you treat them like they're number one?
I mean, look, it's all net rating. I mean, they have the best net rating in the league, and that's why they're there. I mean, look, they're 21-4 in 10-point games. Suns are 21-6 in 10-point games. So, that stuff matters. I don't treat them like they're number one because I said before, I don't trust this offense. And Steph Curry is slumping. And at some point in time in the playoffs, we're going to see when teams are allowed to trap and they're allowed to pull and get physical with Steph Curry, you're going to need Andrew Wiggins. You're going to need Jordan Poole. You're going to need Klay Thompson coming off of an ACL and Achilles injury to be able to create their own shots. And there was a reason why this team had to bring Kevin Durant in. And I think you're going to see that. And I think we're seeing it right now with this offense.
So when you're capping them nightly, I got to ask you, how do you adjust it then? Like, you're obviously taking out Draymond, right? Injuries are part of that. You got to adjust for Draymond being out. But what are the weights that you're putting on that kind of affects what the number ultimately gives you if this is your unadjusted?
I think it depends on the team. So, like, last week, we all like the Bucks against the Golden State Warriors. There's no Draymond Green. The Warriors are going to struggle to be able to stop a physical specimen like Giannis Antetokounmpo in the paint. But then you look at the next night, I'm coming right back. I'm taking the Warriors money line against the Chicago Bulls, who they gave up 138 offensive rating to the Nets 2 nights previously. And even though the Bulls had a day off, you look, Steph Curry still has that gravity to be able to get guys open shots. And I felt like the Bulls offense wasn't going to be able to keep up with the Warriors just based on how their defense was. So I think it's a night-to-night league more than anything else. And you look at the games against the Suns, they're able to switch. They still are a dominant defensive team. They're the best defensive team in the league. So you can't totally write off this Warriors team. I'm just speaking as far as the playoffs when you need a basket. I don't know if they really have a guy other than Steph Curry who can help you do that.
Look at you using switch. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you talking about the coverages, Ra.
I'm just so glad that sentence ended with other than Steph Curry. I really thought we were just going to not have a guy to get a bucket in the playoffs, and I was just about to melt down. But let's keep moving. We'll say plenty more about the Suns, Warriors, Jazz, because I got to get to number 4 in the power ratings. By the way that the composite worked out, they're in a tier all on their own. They're the top team in the East in our power ratings. They're not the Nets. They're not the Bucks. They're not the Bulls. The Cleveland Cavaliers. You both have them in your top 5. Raheem at 4, Matt at 5. So what does it mean for the Cavs that we have them so high in the power ratings and at the top of the East? Do we need to take them more seriously than we have been, Matt?
I don't know. The Cavs' big edge here is, from my perspective, is in transition. That's where they wind up getting the biggest edge. Like they're 0.09 because of how good they are in transition. Now they're not the best. They're not the best transition team, but overall, in terms of half court or transition offense and defense, they wind up being great. Like they're 8th in transition offense per Synergy Sports, and they're also 8th in transition defense. So they've just been great on both ends. If you have that kind of solid advantage, that's going to get you a big thing. We're going to see this with a lot of the teams. We're going to talk about this. I think we'll talk about this a lot today. Is from my perspective, a lot of where I'm going to come from is a lot of teams have edges in transition because of how well they play in it, not necessarily how often they do. And some of the teams I'm more skeptical of play a lot in transition, but aren't great at it. And that's going to be like a big question mark for me come playoff time. Look, the Cavs are solid, right? Obviously, like defensively is where they make their bones, right? Like that's where they brew the broth. They are 5th in half court defense. If you're elite in one of those areas, you're going to grade out pretty well on your mind system. Like they're 16th in half court offense, but they're getting such an advantage in half court defense based off of how often they make the opponent play in it that it gets them a big edge. They don't allow a lot of half court of transition opportunities, and when they are in transition, they score hyper efficiently. So that's where the Cavs get a really big bump from my system.
Yeah, I think too, we need to be careful. You know, the power ratings are what are we seeing from these teams right now in the regular season? And I think part of an answer to my question, why are we underrating them, is because we're looking to the playoffs and it's a different game of the playoffs. And do we trust this young team to get it done then? But it's a different answer to what about night to night? How are we going to bet the Cavs night to night? And how can we play some of their futures right now? We've talked about just on the last podcast on Monday, we talked about Cavs division odds. We talked about like JB Bickerstaff as a coach of the year. Just playing them in season before the playoffs can still be a big thing too.
Yeah. And I think part of this too, look, I mean, I don't know about you, Rob, but like I bet the Cavs a lot. Like I've early season when their numbers popped up, like that was a team that I started being like, they're still underrated. They're still underrated. They're still underrated. I think the market's catching up. Like we talked about this before the season about how the second half of the season is so tough because the books catch up. Like the books are like, no. I'm not giving you Cavs +6 on this Wednesday night versus the Hornets. I'm not giving you, Cavs +4 at home versus the Bulls. And we saw last night they lost to Chicago. And I think that ultimately they'll probably come back down to earth a little bit and the models will kind of reflect that. One thing that Raheem, I think, has got a big edge on me on is I don't have the capability. Not right now. I'm going to try and build in the offseason. I don't have the capability to sort by like date function. So I've got full season numbers. So if you're playing killer over the last 2 weeks, I'm not going to know. And I have to like manually keep in my head, okay, they've been like the Pelicans are a great example of this, where they're super low for me. I got to keep in mind, like they are a better team than they were in that first month of November. With the Cavs, I think it's a big question of if I will just say this, like if the numbers keep popping out that they're a dog and the model shows an edge, like this is the really difference is they've been a great team to bet. They've been great against the spread, and the numbers have shown that they're not like outperforming the power ratings that we have. They're in line with how good they've been against the spread.
Yeah, and I think there's value too to your system, Matt, to help avoid recency bias and avoid to an extent, because if the team's playing better, maybe that's because a player came back or because they're getting like there might be any number of important reasons to make the manual adjustment on a night-to-night game, but it might also just be that maybe they've had a softer schedule. Maybe they just have had their shots falling for a couple of weeks, and we can fall prey to that. So I think it's not the worst thing in the world to include those early games because those are the data points that count too. Maybe not quite the same weight as the more recent ones, but it's good to get both of those. Let's keep moving down the tiers. So
before we move on with the Cavs, I do think there was a spot where, like for most of the year, they've been undervalued. And then obviously you lose Sexton, you continue to win, but then you lose Rubio. And they had actually lost 5 of 6 at one point. And they stabilized enough to where they won 5 in a row. So there's so many ebbs and flows within the NBA season. And you can just see where a team will be undervalued for a while, be overvalued, and then undervalued again. And I think that's what happened with the Cavs.
That's a great point, Raheem.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so next tier down, staying in the East, that's 3 East teams. We got the Miami Heat, the Brooklyn Nets, and the Philadelphia 76ers in that order. That is 5, 6, and 7 in our composite. So Matt is carrying the ratings here because Matt has the Nets 4th and the Sixers 6th. I don't think that's super surprising from what the perception is. So Raheem, I need to hear from you. You've got the Nets 12th and the Sixers 13th in your ratings. Why do you feel like your ratings are down on both of these teams? And these are favorites. What can we take away from them being a little bit lower for you?
I mean, one thing you have to realize with the Nets is they have some they had some bad losses. They lost to like a Clippers team. So like, and it wasn't even close. So you're looking at a 12-point loss to the Clippers team, and that's going to impact your rating. So when you lose to the Oklahoma City Thunder, that's going to impact your rating. And like all this stuff is raw and it's unadjusted. Like I think they lost by 21 to the Thunder. So that's going to impact your net rating, and it inherently incorporates strength of schedule. So if you're losing to some of the worst teams in the league, your rating isn't going to come out too well.
So conversely then, Matt, your ratings are high in both these teams. Is that a half-court offense thing, or why does your system still trust the Nets and Sixers quite a bit?
Yeah, so for the Nets, they've got a massive half-court advantage offensively, which you'd expect, right? Like this is the most loaded offense that you would anticipate. So they've got a .035, and I understand these numbers don't mean a whole lot. Think of this as like, to compare it, if you're looking at a team like Chicago is at .032. So the Nets are better than Chicago, obviously. And if you're at a .03 or above, you're pretty elite in half court in terms of the advantage versus the average team's offense. But the big difference for the Nets is that their defense was so good that first 2 months of the season that my model hasn't caught up. Right? Their defense has been starting to fade, and my model hasn't caught up to that yet. Their half-court defense still continues to be very strong. And so the overall measures are going to look way better. Like they are still currently 9th in half-court defense league-wide. If you're listening to this and you're a Nets fan, you're probably like, Matt, you've been saying this and they're still 9th. At what point are you going to? I'm never going to believe that the Brooklyn Nets are going to be a good half-court defensive team for the whole of the season or in the playoffs. I will not leave this position. I will continue to play against it. But I will say, like, look, if they do play this good of defense, if they are able to get stops, then it gives them a massive advantage because, ultimately in half court, the Nets have one of the highest advantages of any team. I think they have the highest of any team in the league. They're at .05. Like no team, I don't think even comes close to that. Like Golden State, well, never mind. Golden State's at .07, but the Nets are so good in half court offense and really good in half court defense that's giving them a huge advantage. With the Sixers, I do want to note this. You guys know this number has been up there all season, and it's been wild to me. The Sixers run some of the fewest transition opportunities in the league. So they basically just don't run. It makes sense, right? You got Embiid. You're going to go down. You're going to walk the ball up. You're going to run your offense, and you're going to get the big fella of the ball. when they run, the Sixers are the number one transition offense in the league. Nobody scores better per possession than the Sixers. Now, my model accounts for how often teams run, but one of the big differences here is it's versus an average team. And if an average team gives up more transition opportunities than the Sixers usually run, it's going to bump the Sixers a little bit more than maybe they should be. It's a weakness in the model, but it's worked out pretty well in terms of betting it.
That makes sense. All right, we're going to keep moving. So next tier down, the tiers are getting a little fatter in the middle here. That's how this usually works. So from 8 to 13, these are the teams that I think we'd probably think of as a second round playoff team, but we might be past the title contenders now. So at number 8, Dallas Mavericks. Number 9, Chicago Bulls. 10, the Bucks. 11, Celtics. 12, Grizzlies. And 13, Nuggets. So I have 2 questions in the section. The things that stood out to me here is at 9, the Bulls, and 10, the Bucks. The Bulls are the 1 seed right now in the East and have been for a chunk of the season now. The Bucks are the defending champions. We've got them at 9 and at 10 here. I think that's going to be a little surprising. And you're both about even on where those teams are at in your model. That's about where your models both have them. So, Raheem, what do we need to take away from the Bulls and Bucks being maybe a little lower than someone might expect here?
Okay, when it comes to the Bucks, I think a good comp for them is probably the LeBron Cavaliers of his second stint. Like, we know this team's not going all out in the regular season. They've had some injuries, and you almost you almost have to throw away the number when it comes to them, because on certain nights they're going to show up in those primetime spots, like against the Memphis Grizzlies and the Golden State Warriors. They're going to show up and they're going to dominate. But for most of the season, they're kind of just coasting until they get there. So when it comes to the Bucks, I just don't even think you could even take the number seriously. When it comes to the Chicago Bulls, look, they've had some injuries all season long, and they've floated by, but you're seeing that there's been a drop-off recently. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of the guys banged up. Zach LaVine's out of the lineup. Caruso's been in and out of the lineup. Lonzo's been in and out of the lineup. And they've been fortunate to have DeRozan, who's been dominant in these fourth quarters. He's one of the highest fourth quarter scorers in the league right now. And he's hit some clutch shots. So they aren't necessarily blowing these teams out either.
Yeah, and we're recording this on Thursday. Just earlier today, the news came out with Lonzo Ball. Looks like he's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks now. So not good news. We're getting a little shorthanded on my and Matt's Chicago Bulls this season. So hopefully the Bulls.
How are they your Chicago Bulls now? You've been hating on them all.
They've always been my Chicago Bulls. Come on, I'm in my childhood bedroom. I got black and red behind me. I've been a Bulls fan my entire life. Let's keep moving. Still in the 8 to 13 tier though. So if you look at all the ratings, all of the teams we said, Mavs, Bulls, Bucks, Celtics, Nuggets, you've got them all somewhere between 8 and 13. The one team that neither of you have between 8 and 13 is the Grizzlies. They come in 12th in our composite, but Raheem has them at 6. Matt, noted Grizzlies hater, Matt Moore, 17th in the power ratings. Matt, I know you've been a Grizzlies guy for a long time. That's our biggest discrepancy, and I think our most important. 6th to 17th is a huge discrepancy. So yeah. What is your model not liking about the Grizzlies?
So I dug into this a little bit yesterday on Twitter. It's fascinating. Offensively, the Grizzlies look like this explosive team. That's how they feel, right? They feel like this absolutely dynamic Ja, Desmond Bane, all the shooters, Jaren Jackson, got all this stuff. I was shocked when I looked at these numbers because I was trying to figure out the same thing. When you put this out, I was like, why do I have them that low? The Grizzlies this season are 24th in transition offense per possession and 23rd in half court offense per possession. If you say, okay, Matt, but the net rating has them really dominant. And I was like, why? I was like, but they're not even good in transition. Like usually I'd be like, oh, well, they're probably just like running the hell out of teams and beating them that way. And here's like where it gets to, and Seth Part now helped me out with this because he directed me to Cleaning the Glass, which has got a number called points plus per possession. And what I ask is, what's your advantage based off of basically how often you run the type of offense? The Grizzlies are less efficient in transition offense on the fast break than most teams. They don't score as well. But naturally, definitively, transition buckets are always more efficient than half court. Think of it. Like, that's easy, right? layups, open threes. Even if the Grizzlies aren't as efficient as the average team in transition, they do it a shit ton. Like, they just run constantly. They have one of the highest transition rates in the league. So by simple virtue of opting for a more effective transition or a more effective offensive opportunity in transition versus half court, even though they're not great in that category, that's how they get that net rating. This has also helped me to understand I hate to say this as a Grizzlies guy, guys. I know that you like the Grizzlies to make the Western Conference Finals. I'm telling you, these numbers scare the hell out of me as a Grizzlies guy. You get into you have to play half court when you get into the playoffs. Yeah. The Lakers were able to do it. They were able to be dominant in transition with stops, chaotic defense, and be able to play it. I don't think they're doomed depending on the matchup. But boy, their reliance on transition to boost up that net rating, I think is something that the overall net rating models are not accounting for.
You have a point. Yeah.
I'll say this, though. Part of Raheem's argument is that the Grizzlies would be a good favorite against the Warriors. Yep. And the transition model fits against the Warriors because the one flaw the Warriors always have is the turnovers. So the Grizzlies force their turnovers, get out and run, and get those little 6-8 point swings in a hurry. And I think, that's the exact sort of team that has always been able to damage the Warriors. So I think it is a matchup thing there too, where you're right, against a team like the Jazz or like the Suns, that half court, you gotta convert now. And that's the problem there. But the Warriors, that is a team where if I'm the Warriors, I'm not that worried necessarily, but I might be kind of gaming the bracket and trying not to really put the Grizzlies in my path toward the end there.
If we get to the playoffs and the Grizzlies knock off, let's say Denver, because Denver's kind of chaotic too. If the Grizzlies knock off the Nuggets, or even if let's say that they actually get past the Warriors, and I'm like, screw it, I'm taking Memphis. They're just beating everybody. Like, I'm right. I need you guys to remind me of this conversation if they go up against Jazz or Phoenix. I need you to be like, but Matt, like, remember the whole thing, and then I'll disregard it. But at least you have done your part to try and warn me off of it, because I got caught by the Nuggets last year by buying too much into narrative and not into the matchup.
All right, let's keep moving. We're just going to whip through the rest of the teams here. Obviously, we've hit the more important teams. Next, we got a little mini tier, 14, 15, and 16. Clippers, Timberwolves, Hornets. The only thing that stood out here is the Clippers here. So Raheem's got the Clippers at 21. That seems about what I was expecting. Matt, you have the Clippers at 10th. So yep. I know this is a spot I wondered where is your model giving too much credit to the Paul George version of the Clippers and not adjusting yet, but he's missed a bunch of games. How are the Clippers top 10 in your model?
Defense, man. It's all defense. They got a 0.03 advantage in overall half court based off of their defense, essentially. Like, they are a slightly below average half court team. And part of that is because they still take a ton of threes. So even if they're not as efficient, like, that's still going to boost you up in the half court offensive ratings typically per possession, because you're just getting more points. Right. And then in transition, they actually have a little bit of a dog there. They're not as good in transition. But I will just say, like, it's largely based off of where they wind up advancing is they maintain the kind of style that they want. You saw this last night, I think, versus the Nuggets. They play the game where they want to play it in terms of transition and half court. They win in the margins. You guys are always talking about how great a coach Ty Lue is. I think this is proof of that, is that they're able to hang in there. Now, a lot of this is that, yeah, like, as Paul George goes, like, they've dropped from like top 4 to top 8, and now they're 10. They'll probably be 16 here in short order, but I do think that they're I'll stand by it. I think that they're better. They've performed well against the spread, even with PG and Kawhi out. And I think part of that is that they win on the margins a lot.
Yeah, and credit to Ty Lue too. We've given a lot of credit to him over the years, but definitely he's got those guys playing, and we shouldn't expect the Clippers to be anywhere near a 10th rating with as little as they've had from Paul George and nothing from Kawhi Leonard. So good on the Clippers for hanging in. All right, next tier down, 17 to 23. There's one team that shouldn't really be in this tier from what we thought coming into the season. See if you can spot it. Wizards, Raptors, Knicks, Los Angeles Lakers,
oh boy,
Spurs, Hawks, and Pacers. So, Raheem, here's what I need to know from you. The Lakers are 20th in our composite ranking. You had them 23rd in your power rating. So 2 questions. Number one, from your memory, what is the last time any LeBron team has been power rated this low in a model for you? And then second question, what's the range of outcome for Lakers here on a power rating? How high could they get? How bad could it get?
I think I might have started modeling. Like when did I start modeling? Probably, I don't remember, but it's never happened. Like it's just never happened. Like even with those Cavs teams where you saw that they were coasting and they were like really bad. Like even the year where they traded Kyrie and it was just like, all right, yeah, I think I might have. I kept saying everybody the Cavs are second round exit. This team is just complete dog shit. Like, and I kind of have to use foul language to say it, but you saw it last night against the Indiana Pacers. They're controlled for most of this game, and then next thing you know, it goes left. Like this team, they can't score. They're 25th in offensive rating. They're 18th in defensive rating. This is not a good team at all. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that you don't have two-way players. You don't have Anthony Davis. You got Russell Westbrook, who's a turnover machine. Last night, he just happened to be able to make every three. And that's kind of what gave them the lead initially. But it's just the pieces don't fit.
So let me come back to the range of outcomes then. Assuming that LeBron stays relatively healthy, because obviously we don't want to, we don't need to figure out that factor. Assuming that, how far up do you think that the Lakers can still get? Maybe Anthony Davis gets back, looks good. They get some of the other guys going. And on the other hand, again, still assuming LeBron is mostly healthy, how far down can they fall? Can the Lakers miss the playoffs? Like, what do you think is the range of regular season outcome to you at this point?
To me, like the highest they could possibly get up is in the 14th, 15th range. And I think that's around where I have the Raptors and the Timberwolves. Like that's the best case scenario. If Anthony Davis comes back and LeBron is playing well and they bench Russell Westbrook, which I think they just came out today and said Vogel has permission to do so. And, maybe they can, trade somebody. That's probably the best case scenario for me. The worst case scenario, I think the season can go completely off the rails and they can miss the playoffs.
Do you think they missed the play-in?
I'm not going to go that far. No, because I like the Blazers are tanking. I don't believe in the Pelicans. I think they can make the play-in game.
Okay, so let's hit the bottom of the power ratings here and then wrap up. So 24 and 25 is Kings Blazers. You just mentioned them. 26, 27, 28 Pelicans, Thunder, Rockets.
I think we need to hear what Matt has to say about the Lakers because he has them 16.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Matt, why are the Lakers closer to average for you?
I'll hit this quick. They're great in transition. Like that's really the answer is they're not great. They're good. They're 12th in transition offense and defensively they're 17th, which is okay. Defensively, they're hanging in the half court. They're 15th. Now they're 20th in half court offense. So what winds up happening on my side of the power rating is they wind up 0. They are exactly 0 in half court. Like that's what the advantage I show versus an average team is that they should tie a team in half court, but they're a little better in transition. And so that gets them just like a smidge of an advantage in it. They are at 0.01 in net half court and defense in transition. So that basically is why I have them as an average team. And look, the standings kind of reflect this. Like they are a team that feels a lot worse than they are. Now, they may not turn it around because I think they're about to Frank Vogel, and I think that's a mistake. Anthony Davis hasn't been good this season, and if he comes back, I don't know when he's going to give him. And they may wind up trading Russ, and I don't know what they're getting back. But I'll just say, like, I continue to be hesitant to put the tombstone on because a lot of the under the hood numbers are like, okay, yeah, they smell like dog shit. I'm not sure that they are dog shit. And that's the difference between me and Raheem.
We're going to have to put the little E on this episode for sure. Matt, what do you think is a high-end outcome for you on range of outcomes? Can they get up to 10th by the end of the season in yours?
I think they can get to probably 12th. I think it'd be tough to get into a higher tier than that. That seems like it'd be pretty high, comparatively speaking. Like looking at where the power ratings kind of shake out. Like, are they going to finish Probably 11th, because 11th are the, I've got the Clippers 10th. And so the Bucks are 11th. Yeah, it's got to be. I don't think they can get higher than 12. They can finish up there with the Celtics. Like, they could be as good as the Celtics. And that to me is about as high as I can get them.
Yeah. And on the lower end there too, just to come back to those teams down at the bottom, Kings, Blazers at 24 and 25, Pelicans, Thunder, Rockets are the next three. Those are all West teams, all 5 of those. So the Lakers, as bad as it could be, their range of outcome, I think it still doesn't quite fall into that group of 5. And then, of course, the bottom 2, we've got the Magic and Pistons. Last question here, wrapping up. The only thing I noticed about this group of 7 down at the bottom, Matt, you've got the Pelicans 28th. Yeah. And that's really not particularly notable because Raheem only has them 25th. It's not a big difference. But in this case, it does mean that the Pelicans still fall behind the Thunder and the Rockets, who are, playing for like 2028 or something at this point. So you mentioned this with the Pelicans before. Obviously, they had the terrible start. Is that it? Is it just too much baked into the numbers, or is there something else happening there?
So, I mean, their offense has gotten back together since Brandon Ingram has been back playing with them. When they have Devontae Graham, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and JV, they actually play pretty well. But Brandon Ingram's been in and out of the lineup. And so that, I think, has tanked a lot of their numbers. A lot of this is, so I explained, right? Like, there's more half court opportunities than transition naturally. You're always going to have a lot more, like 80% of your offense, of your time spent on both ends of the floor is in half court, because guys can get back, right? And stop it. And you're like, all right, let's get a good possession. Well, here's the big differential is that in half court, the Pelicans are 27th in the league. And in defense, they're 29th in the league. So if for the majority of the time you're terrible, even if you're trying to push the ball more, like, this is the whole Grizzlies problem, right? Is that's why I have the Grizzlies so much lower, is that for the majority of the time, that team is not good. In the small percentage of the time, that team is very effective. And that differential is why, like, they're able to stay higher. But in my rating, that's going to pound them, because it basically says, look, if you just like play average transition defense, they're not going to be able to do enough against you. And that, honestly, I think is a little bit more reflective of who they are.
I think that's fair. So my other question for you, and then you can get us out of here. Just on the last time the 3 of us were together, your Back to the Future was Pelicans under 11.5 seed.
Yep.
So given this model and how your model is so low on the Pelicans, how do you reconcile those two? Did you just talk yourselves out of the under 11.5, or do you still feel good about it?
No, because the Pelicans have no incentive to peel off and tank. They need to try and actually look like a decent team to get some momentum, especially if you know who decides that he's coming back, then they're definitely going to want to look pretty decent to try and lower the chances of him taking a qualifying offer and bolting to the apple. So the long-term future of the Pelicans has a lot of positive outcomes. If they can get healthy, and that's a big if, but if they can get healthy, and there's also, I think, trade opportunities in there as well. But just based off of this, they can slide up those other teams that we talked about in Friday Futures, specifically because those other teams are the ones that are going to be like, oh, is it All-Star already? Oh man, that's a shame. Our star player has a hamstring. He's going to be out an indeterminate amount of time. So that's part of the equation as well. I don't think the Pelicans are good. I think that they have major problems. I think that there's a lot more drama coming to that team, but I do think that they can wind up getting 11th or 10th in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I think so. All right. That's going to wrap it up today at the Buckets podcast. Matt, tell us again about the book that people can win.
If you want to win a copy of Chris Herring from Sports Illustrated's new book, Blood in the Garden, just leave a 5-star review on either Spotify or Apple. Let us know your Twitter handle. Hit me up on Twitter, and you'll be eligible to win a random copy of Chris Herring's new book, Blood in the Garden, about the 90s New York Knicks. It's absolutely phenomenal. Check it out. Make sure to download the Action Network app to track your bets, keep up with all that stuff. Until next week, we'll be back on Tuesday with the big picture, and we'll see you guys again next week. Let's get buckets.